Greetings everyone, my name is Connie Wynn. This is my white privilege presentation part 2. In this presentation I will present for you part 3, chapter 4, entitled White Privilege, White Supremacy. The United States of America at the beginning of the 21st century, a century and a half after the end of slavery, 4 decades after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, is a white supremacist society. A white supremacist society is one whose founding is based in an ideology of the inherent superiority of white Europeans over non-whites. This ideology has justified legal and extra-legal exploitation of every non-white immigrant group. It is used to this day to rationalize the racialized disparities in the distribution of wealth and well-being in this society. It is a fact. White people occupy most of the top positions in powerful institutions, with similar privileges available in limited ways to non-white people who fit themselves into white society. So how can we claim the entire society is white supremacist? The author says, look at the numbers. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton promised a national conversation on race. The conversation didn't get very far, but his Council of Economic Advisors for the President's Initiative on Race did gather a large amount of data. The following slides represent their findings. Whites are more likely than racial ethnic minorities to attend primary and secondary schools with smaller class sizes, have access to computer technology in public school and at home during primary and secondary schooling, attend and graduate from college, earn higher salaries, retain employment during a downturn in the economy, be covered by health insurance, survive certain life-threatening illnesses. As you remember, in our recent textbook reading, we read about medical disparities with ethnic minorities, and it is proven that ethnic minorities do not receive the same level of care as non-Hispanic white Europeans. Experience more favorable housing conditions. Spend a smaller percentage of household income on housing. Have unimpeded access to home mortgage loans and home ownership. Own stocks, mutual funds, and IRA accounts. In this chapter, a comparison was done, particularly between blacks and whites. The author says the numbers are stark. According to a 2004 study by United for a Fair Economy, blacks are falling behind on certain measures. The typical black family had 60% as much income as a white family in 1968, but only 58% as much in 2002. 1 in African Americans cannot find a job. Black unemployment is more than twice that of whites. Black infants are almost 2.5 times as likely as white infants to die before age 1. Again, this reflects on the medical disparities that exist for ethnic minorities. White households had an average net worth of $468,200 in 2001. More than 6 times the $75,700 of black households. Closing the gap between black and white is decades or even centuries away. At the slow rate that the black-white poverty gap has been narrowing since 1968, it would take 150 years until 2152 to close. For every dollar of white per capita income, African Americans had 55 cents in 1968 and only 57 cents in 2001. Only 57 cents. That is so sad. At this pace, it would take blacks 581 years to get the remaining 43 cents. Although white home ownership has jumped from 65 to 75% since 1970, black home ownership has only risen from 42 to 40%. At this rate, it would take 1,664 years to close the gap. If current rates of incarceration continue, 1 out of every 3 African American males born today will be imprisoned at some point during their lives. At the current pace, blacks and whites will reach high school graduation parity in 2013 and college graduation parity in 2075, more than 200 years after the end of slavery. So what does white supremacy mean in day-to-day life? Well, in the United States, a black applicant with no criminal record is less likely to receive a callback from a potential employer than a white applicant with a felony conviction. In other words, being black is more of a liability in finding a job than being a convicted criminal. I'm going to read this one more time because I think it's so sad. Being black is more of a liability in finding a job than being a convicted criminal. Studies show that from the mid-1990s through the beginning of the new century, such discrimination in low-wage jobs has remained constant. It's not changing. Researchers have concluded even if employers are not consciously discriminating against black applicants, there are a lot of unconscious processes that come in play that bias or distort employers' perceptions of the suitability of minority applicants. The author says numbers don't tell the whole story. Statistics have to be made real through experiences and stories of people who live with the consequences of white supremacy. I would like you to check out this horrific story of a man who was wrongfully accused of DUI not once, but several times. In a white supremacist society, all white people have some sort of privilege in all settings. It is proven whiteness consistently conveys certain privileges. A simple illustration of this was broadcast on the ABC News program Prime Time. This experiment was called True Colors: Racial Discrimination in Everyday Life. 2 men, one black and one white, who worked for the Leadership Council for Metropolitan Open Communities in Chicago, temporarily relocated to St. Louis. They looked for an apartment, hunted for a job, shopped for shoes and cars, and went about the day-to-day business of living. They were alike in most every respect: their age, their education, their background, their work history. The only difference was race. What happened is absolutely shocking. But rather than just write the results for you to read, I would like you to watch the program for yourselves. It makes me ashamed of our American society. Please click the top link first. That will take you to part 1 of this program. The bottom link will take you to part 2 of this program. If you are unable to activate the links, all you have to do is type in the title of the program, Primetime, True Colors, Racial Discrimination in America, the title of the program, and it will take you to that link. I really encourage you to watch this. It just is so powerful. You need to watch it for yourselves. This program was shown to a class at the University of Texas. The only comment made by the students was that the program was unfair because it didn't show what would happen to a white guy in a black neighborhood. The students didn't want to discuss the problems seen in the program. The author says that's part of white privilege, the privilege to ignore the reality of a white supremacist society when it makes us uncomfortable, to rationalize why it's not really so bad, to deny one's own role in it. It is the privilege of remaining ignorant because that ignorance is protected. Now going back to the video that you just, the one part where they're looking for an apartment, and John goes to look at a single bedroom apartment. The manager hands him the keys, he goes and checks it out, he comes back, he tells the manager, well, I'm not sure if I want it or not. And the manager says, okay, well, just let me know. So John leaves. Well, then Glenn comes. The man shows Glenn the apartment. No, wait, stop, rewind. No, Glenn comes to look at the apartment, and the man says, I'm sorry, it's already rented. I had a call this morning, when in fact the apartment was not rented. And then, of course, Diane Sawyer comes in, she confronts the man, she confronts the owner of the apartment, and what do they say? They say, oh, we're not racist, we don't have any bad attitudes. But clearly they do. If they didn't, would they have treated Glenn like they did? Absolutely not. They would have treated him in the exact same manner as they did John. So please, I hope that you will take from chapter, it's important to not live in ignorance. Our society is white supremacist, and it's time that we stand up and do what's right. Thank you.